Hello everybody, Simone Chierchini here from Aikido Italia Network. I just finished reading a very, very interesting book. That's the one. Suck it up or go home. It's an amazing story, I have to say, and this is why we're here today talking to the author. Simon Gray here is with us, and he's going to tell us all about it. Of course, what you should do is read the book. Okay, I'm saying this first of all, but it's a good appetizer, and I hope to stimulate your curiosity. Simon, can you please tell us something about yourself before we actually start talking about the book in itself? I've done my research. I know you have a past in sport arts, combative sport arts actually, yes. And at some level I should say. So can you tell us a little bit about it? Because
sure.
we're gonna end up talking a lot about Aikido, but it's a very, very interesting point of view because it belongs to someone that has actually done a lot of competitions at high level.
Okay.
Go on.
Okay. Well, first of all, pleasure to be here, Simone. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak to your network. I'm really pleased you enjoyed the book, and I'll answer any questions that you ask me today, no matter what. So feel free to ask me anything. You're absolutely right. Before I went to Japan in 2005, did the 2006, 2007 Senshisei Right Police course. Before that, I'd done quite a lot of martial arts. So I'd done about 15, 16 years in Muay Thai, Thai boxing. I'd done some Kung Fu. I'd done a little bit of MMA, some boxing. But I was introduced to Aikido probably around about 2003, 2004. And the art fascinated me. I'd been brought up, I guess, watching the martial arts films of the 80s, Bruce Lee, Steven Seagal. And Aikido always looked beautiful and extremely effective. So got into Aikido in the UK. The opportunity came to go to Japan. And I thought it would be an interesting journey to go and see what Aikido was really all about in its home country, with a background in more of the striking arts. So that's where I began, really, the striking arts.
Yes. May I ask you, what kind of Aikido did you practice in the UK? What kind of style?
Yes, so the style in the UK was called Showdown. So Showdown style, it was kind of, I guess it was similar in part to Yoshinkan, but it was more of a standalone organization, a separate, it gets a bit complicated with the different types of Aikido.
Oh, yeah. This, as usual.
Yes.
As usual. There's nothing simple about Aikido, nothing.
No. This was a separate organization. Many of the shapes, many of the moves, Kiondosa, very similar, but some slight differences in the basic waza, the techniques, the foundational stuff. But I guess it was more of a derivative of Yoshinkan Aikido. Shared many things, many common traits with Yoshinkan Aikido.
Okay, and obviously you had an interest in the martial part of the training, as your career amply shows. Where does it come from? I know that a lot of people have a different approach to Budo, and some people don't really like the idea of, it's actually very funny, but they don't like the martial in martial arts. So yes. What was your take on that at the time, before the course?
Yeah, I mean, for me, martial arts has always been about being able to look after myself. For me, martial arts has always been self-defense. And my martial arts journey really started having gone to quite a tough school as a young kid, as a teenager. I went to boarding school when I was 13. It was a very tough environment. It was very different, I think, to how a boarding school might be today. There was one guy in my school who was kind of feared and revered by everybody else. And this guy was a martial artist. And although he was only the year above me, and there were people 2 or 3 years ahead of him, Everybody in the school respected him and nobody messed with him. And I got bullied. I thought it was quite fascinating that this guy was smaller than me, but he knew something that I didn't. And what he knew was Kung Fu. And I made a promise to myself that when I left that school 3 years after starting, that I would go on my own journey in the martial arts, because I'd seen what it had done for him, and I wanted to learn to protect myself. So that's where my kind of love affair with martial arts really began, at the age of about 16. In fact, at the age of 16.
Well, that's in common with a lot of people. Then,
Yeah.
of course, along the line, there's many other motivations that keep you going. And so let's start to get closer to our subject.
Okay.
You decided to go to Japan and do this thing, okay?
Yes.
This famous thing. Can you, before you describe your own experience, can you tell a few words to people that are not familiar with the Yoshinkan Senshusei course, and tell us a little bit about it?
Okay. Well, I started Aikido 2003, 2004, I think, in the UK. And at about that time, around in the changing area, even on the mats, people were talking about this book called Angry White Pajamas. And I'd never heard of this book, but I was pretty interested in Aikido. I gave it a read, and I discovered through reading the book that there was something called the Senshusei, or the Riot Police course, as it's often called, in Tokyo, Japan. And what I learned from reading the book was that this was an 11-month martial arts boot camp that took you from white belt to black belt and beyond to gain an instructor's license from Japan. And I read the book. I was fascinated by the stories. I was fascinated by the characters in the book. And I started to ask myself the question, well, what if I went to Japan? What if I went on a similar journey? What if I went to Japan and trained with the masters and had a real experience, a real cultural experience, a real Budo experience? And I started to put a plan in place to go to Japan in the first instance, and then once in Japan, make a decision as to whether I was going to do the Senshusei course. So Senshusei effectively means specialist. So in Japan, as a Senshusei student, you're the lowest form of life in the dojo, which I do communicate throughout the book and is very obvious when you're there and through reading the book. But you are regarded as a specialist student that is training in one martial arts to the highest level at the Yoshinkan Aikido Hombu Dojo in Tokyo. It's called the Riot Police course because it was initially started to take the Tokyo Riot Police through a Budo art to qualify for the Riot Police. The Yoshinkan Aikido Hombu Dojo has a long-standing relationship with the Metropolitan Police in Tokyo. Westerners wanted to go and do this thing, so after many years of training the police, it was open to Westerners to go and do the course themselves. I was the 16th international or Kokusai course, and we trained alongside the Kidotai, the Riot Police, for at least some of the time, albeit their course lasted 9 months and ours lasted 11 months. So arguably, you could say our course was a little bit harder.
Well, from what you tell in the book, it definitely was, yeah.
Yeah.
What kind of madness? Why did you decide to do this thing? I understand the challenge, but maybe after having read your book, that's what I really thought. Why did he do it? Why did he do it? Well, what was the purpose? Was it just the challenge, or was something else?
It's a very good question, and as you'll know from the book, I do quite a lot of soul searching in the book, and I'm writing the book 13 years after I did the course. So it's an opportunity to reflect from perhaps more mature eyes. And there's a chapter in the book called My Everest, and you might remember this chapter. And I make an analogy between why people climb Mount Everest. Why do they do it? It's a life-threatening experience. It's a very tough and arduous task. Why do they do it? And I kind of argue in the book that actually they probably do it because it's there and they know it's there. And if you're into mountaineering or mountain climbing, then it's the pinnacle of what you would go and do. And until you do it, it's kind of this nagging thing in the back of your mind that maybe I'll do it, maybe I won't. So for a martial artist like me, studying Aikido in the UK, my Everest was the Yoshinkan Aikido Senshusei course. I wasn't aware of any other martial arts courses in the world that lasted that length of time. And it fascinated me, and it was my Everest that I needed to climb. I trained abroad before. I trained Muay Thai, Thai boxing in Thailand, but these were for 2 weeks at a time. This was 11 months. And
yeah, it's an entirely different proposition.
Yeah. And I had to do it because I knew it was there. And I wanted to test myself and see if I could get through it.
So eventually you manage to sell your stuff, you put your savings together, and you go to Japan. You don't speak a word of Japanese, do I get it right?
Yeah, not very much. I literally,
not at the time anyway.
At the time, no, I had, I did buy a phrase book and an audio CD, and I did some study before I went, and I distinctly remember being on the aeroplane flying out to Tokyo, practicing Japanese with anyone who, I remember having an audience on the plane of Japanese people flying home from the UK, and I was practicing phrases on the plane. So I was determined that if I was going to live in this country, it was my responsibility, and as respect for the country that I'm living in, I felt I had an obligation to learn the language, or at least try my best.
Of course. And that actually is part of the overall challenge, I suppose, because you not only did the Aikido thing, you did, first of all, the cultural and social part of it.
Yes.
So you're there. You eventually find where the Yoshinkan Hombu Dojo is, and you enter.
Yes.
What do you find?
What do I find? Well, I was quite shocked, to be honest, because you have an image of what the Yoshinkan Aikido Hombu Dojo might look like. And I guess my image of what that place might look like was probably what I found in Iwama, Ueshiba Sensei's dojo. Of
course.
But
traditional,
a traditional dojo, very obvious what it was. So I found my way to Ochiai, which I know is where the dojo is located, and I couldn't find it. It was in an office building, and the only clue from the street, if you can imagine a quite a busy road outside, the only clue from the street was Aikido in the windows. Oh, so yes. I remember walking through the very first day, walking into this office building, and I got in the lift. The only time I ever used the lift, because Senshusei weren't permitted to use the lift. And I went up to it was either the second or third floor, depending on whether you're in the UK or the US. I think it was the third floor. I do define it in the book. And I came out of the lift, and I faced the door to the Yoshinkan Aikido Hombu Dojo. And there were two things that struck me, first off. The first thing was a big statue of Kansho Gozo Shioda, a big bust. So I knew I was in the right place. And the other thing that struck me was the noise, because all I could hear was us, 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 and the running of bare feet all around the dojo. So it told me I was in the right place.
And you actually managed to go there and train, but the first time you actually trained in Hombu Dojo, yes, you weren't in the course yet, because
correct.
Basically you joined one of the regular classes.
Yes, correct. I must admit, when I first went into the dojo, I was pretty scared. I mean, it was a completely different feeling from walking into a dojo in this country, in the UK. Yes. First off, it was a very similar feeling, and I draw this comparison in the book, to walking into a Muay Thai boxing gym in Thailand, because you know you're in the place where the best of the best are, and it's a very scary experience. So I'd missed the start of the 2005-2006 course. I think I arrived there, I think it was about May 2005. So I missed the start of the course. So I enrolled in the Ippan, or general classes, and I trained on the same mats as the Senshusei, but at a different end of the dojo. And the black belt that I got in the UK from the Shotokan, that came off. I went back to white belt, and I started training in the general classes. But to be honest, the general classes for me, they weren't enough. And sometimes I wouldn't break a sweat. It didn't feel the level of intensity that I'd felt training back in the UK. And part of me was a little bit disappointed in that. And I knew that if I really wanted to train Aikido in Japan and to get a proper experience, I had to be on the other side of the mats, where I saw firsthand the Senshusei, you know, being punished, being tortured, shouting, screaming, going hard at it. And that's where I wanted to be. So I couldn't wait I made the decision pretty quickly and couldn't wait for the 2006-2007 course to start.
So when eventually the course started, how many of you were there?
Yes.
Yeah, so how many people take part normally into Senshusei course?
So the year before me, I think there were 5 people, 2 Japanese and 3 Western students. In my year, we were quite a big group. So there were 13 of us, 2 Japanese and 11 Westerners, including myself. We came from the UK, Australia, the USA, Canada, and I'm Israel, of course, Israel. Yes, three guys from Israel. So we were a very, very mixed group of people. We were quite a big year. We had an induction meeting, and I remember that one person quit after the induction meeting because they made you sit in seiza, in the kneeling position.
Really?
Yeah, for about 40 minutes. And this guy disappeared after that meeting and was not seen again. He did turn up eventually, but he didn't train with us on the course. So at least one person quit.
Probably it was right to do so, considering the amount of seiza that you actually had to suffer.
Seiza was like the hidden. It's the thing that you didn't realize would be such a big part of an 11-month experience, but it became a huge part of it because of the pain associated with it. And anyone watching who's sat in seiza for more than 10 minutes knows what I'm talking about. And if you haven't, I don't recommend it. But if you want to experience it, try it for 40 minutes or maybe even an hour and a half. And one day I did 4 hours with very, very short breaks, which was a horrendous experience.
Simon, what kind of student is the typical Senshusei student? Is there one, or in your opinion, is there a specific kind of Budoka that goes there? Actually, I know, I heard that there's people that have never done any Budo before going there. One is the author of White Angry Pajamas, for example.
Yes. I was quite surprised, to be honest, because I'd read somewhere that to do the Senshusei course, you had to hold, I think it was at least a 2nd degree black belt in another martial arts. And that made sense to me, because if you're going to put yourself through 11 months of hell, then you've got to have a certain level of conditioning and a certain understanding.
Surely it's a quality check to that.
Yes. And in the information pack I was sent in the UK, it said that you had to be introduced by a Yoshinkan Aikido instructor. So you had to be referred in, which had been my experience in Thailand. To go and train in Thailand, I had to be introduced into a particular gym. So I was quite shocked to find when I got on the course that there were people on the course who had never trained in martial arts before and never trained in Yoshinkan Aikido. And I never really got to the bottom of how they'd made it onto the course. But having done the course and understanding some of what the course is maybe about, by the end I kind of understood, because the Yoshinkan Aikido Senshusei program it's a business at the end of the day. And it's a business model that is designed to put students through a very difficult period of time to learn the basics of Yoshinkan Aikido, and then to gain an instructor's license to then go out into the world, back to their home countries, to spread the word of Yoshinkan Aikido. So I think there's a confusion, if you like. On the one hand, they wanted serious martial artists, but on the other hand, they recognized that to spread the word of Yoshinkan Aikido, perhaps if somebody was interested, well, maybe we'll take them and we'll hope they get through, and we'll hope that they fall in love with Aikido and go and spread the word internationally. So it was a bit confused. The messages were very confused.
Yes, I suppose that's always the dilemma. get an expert and try and teach him, or get someone basically white sheet of paper and start from scratch?
Yes.
Simon, you had 11 months in the dojo, and you started with a certain idea in mind. And reading your book, I know now that you really went through hell at some stage, or I should say more than one stage.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about how really demanding was this? And
yes,
a little bit we said already, the
yes.
Seiza was hell, but in general, how was demanding?
Yes.
Not only the amount of hours, what really was there to challenge you on a daily basis, basically?
Yeah. Okay. Let me tell you a little story. I remember partway, and it's in the book, partway through the course, we would get visitors from overseas who would come and watch a Senshusei class. And I remember being in one of those classes and hearing the visitors on the side of the mat talking to one another saying, this doesn't look that bad. I could do that. And they were absolutely right. That particular class was not that bad. But what makes Senshusei really difficult is the fact that it's 11 months long. And it's 5 days a week for 11 months. There are some breaks for Christmas and various holidays. Japan has a lot of national holidays. I didn't realize it, but they do. So it's not one individual class that breaks you or has the potential to break you. It's the monotony and the repetition. And if you're injured or you're sick, there's no reprieve. You carry on. You're required to carry on. So it's kind of, the way to describe it, it's kind of like a wearing down process, rather than one. If I use if I use a samurai analogy, it's not one cut that finishes you off. It's death by 1,000 cuts. So every day you're injured. There's a nagging injury. You've got to get up early in the morning. And remember as well, we'd be up very early. It wasn't just the training. We'd be in the dojo. We'd have to do the cleaning. We'd have to do lots of ceremonial duties. There were embus to prepare for. We had to do the summer training and the winter training, which started at first class was 7 a.m. So some of those days were 5 hours of training. And we had to do this for 11 months. Physically, I had challenges along the course, as did everybody. Physically, I got injured. But I think the most difficult thing was the mental game, the mental challenge. To turn up, to get up in the morning at 5:20, take 3 trains across Tokyo, and know that for the next 4 to 5 hours, you're going to be in environments where you're going to be shouted at, screamed at. Your time is not your own. Your decision-making is not your own. You need to do as you're told. You need to do it fast. That's a very hard thing to do.
Yes, and I think it's important to point out that this is not the typical experience of the Westerner Aikidoka going to the Aikido Hombu Dojo for a couple of classes. The environment is totally different. Am I right in saying that it looks like being like in a boot camp of the army? It's more or less like that, yeah?
It's more like what I would probably describe it as, and I've never been in the army, but as you know from the book, I do draw comparisons with military life. I think it's very much like the induction that you have if you go and join the army. So your basic training, but the basic training doesn't last 4 weeks, 6 weeks. It lasts 11 months because it is a basic course. It's a foundational course. Maybe I had an expectation at the start that by the end of the course, my Aikido would be really, really, really good. The reality was, by the end of the course, my basics, my foundations, how I held myself in kami, how I moved in Kyondosa was much, much, much better. But I was still a beginner. And as Chino Sensei described, I was a baby black belt. And throughout the course, I was battling injury as everybody was. So you never trained fully healthy. You never trained fully uninjured. So you got to the end with a really good immersion and understanding of Japanese culture, and what it means to train Aikido in Japan. But it didn't, in my opinion, it didn't elevate my level of Aikido to where I thought it might at the start.
There's another thing, just to add to the difficulties that you had. You weren't living on some kind of pension. Yes, you had, like most people that go and do a similar experience, you had to support yourself.
Yes.
First of all, because you need a visa to stay for that long. It's not, again, the typical experience of the tourist Aikido man that goes for a couple of weeks and on a tourist visa. So you actually had to balance life with all this that you just described it, plus living in Japan as a salaryman. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, so I needed a job, and I needed to get a job quickly, because to stay in Japan for an extended period of time, you needed a visa. And I went to Japan initially on a tourist visa, but the promise from the Hombu Dojo in the paperwork that came out before the course began was that they might help you get a cultural visa, because effectively this was a cultural experience. Pretty quickly when I got to Japan, I realized that that wasn't an option. So there was a requirement to get a job to get a visa, and also to get a job to live. So a typical day for me would be up at 5:20 in the morning, getting ready, traveling 3 trains, get to the dojo, do 3 classes, all the bowing and scraping, cleaning duties, leave there about 2. I'd usually have about an hour to travel somewhere to one of the Berlitz schools. I work for an English language school. So I'd then be teaching at Berlitz, could be from 3 p.m. till 10 p.m. at night, or 10 p.m. at night. So it was a very, very long days. And having to be, you were always on show, if you like, because on the mats in the Hombu Dojo, you had to be sharp, you had to be reactive, you had to listen. And then teaching English, you couldn't fall asleep, you couldn't get distracted, because you got students to teach. So mentally, you had to be switched on for a good chunk of the day, then travel home quickly, get some sleep, and then the whole thing started again the next day.
Yes. Was there any part of philosophy in the teaching? These days, Aikido, there's plenty of philosophy around it, and sometimes it feels like there's more philosophy than training.
Yeah.
During this 11 months, was there any of it, or was just training?
In terms of what they taught us in Japan, it was very physical. It was the physical movements that we were taught. We had a weekly class called Zagaku. Zagaku means to sit and learn. This was basically not quite a meditation class, but it was a seated seiza event where Inoue Kansho, the head of Yoshinkan, would come and ask each of us to contribute. We never know who is going to ask. It would be 2 of us each time, to contribute a hansei, a reflection, and a shukan, a habit. We'd have to communicate this in Japanese and then take feedback from one of the sensei or Inoue Kansho himself. So that was more of the philosophical side. That was an exercise in self-reflection. But there really wasn't a deep spiritual thing that I found was taught there. But what I did find, and you'll have got this towards the end of the book, it was a deeply spiritual experience for me towards the end. And when you put yourself through a level of hardship in a very different environment, a different culture, you learn stuff about yourself. And I learned a lot about myself on that course. And I learned a lot about mental strength, mental discipline. And it's only when you come to the end of something like that, that I think that spiritual, that deeper thing comes out. And it comes out by accident because of the experience that you've had. I don't practice Aikido anymore, but I'm still in touch with most of the senior sensei across the world. And I was talking to one of these international teachers online on Messenger, And I said, I don't practice Aikido anymore, but Aikido is still in my heart. And it very much is, because Aikido for me is a principle. It's a principle for life. And I may not practice on the mats anymore, but I practice in daily life.
Yes. There's a sentence that you repeat several times in your book.
Okay.
That you were the lowest level of life within the dojo.
Correct.
Can you explain a little bit, because I suppose for our eyes, no, the dojo is one, everyone is the same. There's a level of respect for the instructor, but more or less senior, junior, senseis, or more or less the same. You haven't found a situation like that, the Yoshinkan Hombu Dojo, I suppose, yes?
No. There was a very, very strict hierarchy at the dojo. Kancho at the top, the Senshusei at the bottom. So although we were on the toughest course, we were on the fast track, if you like. If a new student walked in and registered that day, they were more important and were seen as more important than the Senshisei. I mean, we did all the jobs you didn't want to do, all the cleaning, all the serving, drink, all of this stuff. So it was kind of a two-way thing, really, because on the one hand, we were told we were the lowest of the low, and we would do all the jobs that nobody wanted to do. But on the other hand, anyone who was a Senshisei on the course, and most definitely anyone who had completed the Senshisei course, you could go anywhere in the world, and if you completed the Senshisei course, you can walk into any Aikido dojo and you would gain an instant level of respect having gone through that course. So you do this thing for 11 months where you're treated quite badly. You're the lowest of the low, but it then elevates you through that experience of hardship to a place beyond where you would get to, I believe, if you trained in a regular school 2 or 3 times a week.
Yes, and again, in the book, there's a lovely sentence: fall down 7 times, get up 8. This is the basic philosophy, yes?
This is inscribed here, Nana Kurobi Aoki, fall down 7 times, stand up 8, which is right at the start of the book, and is the Japanese proverb that kind of sums up what it means to be a Senshusei, but also I think what it means to live. And if we look at the environment that we're in at the moment, as a world, collectively, we're facing the coronavirus pandemic. We have to get up every day and keep going. And no matter what the news, we get locked down, we just got to keep going. And that's the Senshusei spirit right there.
Yes. Can you tell us a little bit about your showdown test? You trained for so long for it. You did several mock tests, etc., etc. When you actually did it, how did it feel?
Well, there's a saying in combat sports, which is train hard, fight easy. And I always believed that. For my Muay Thai fights, I train hard so the fight would hopefully be easy. They rarely were, by the way. So the physical showdown test, if you can imagine doing something so much that you don't have to think about it anymore, you hear the command, and instantaneously your body responds, which is a little bit like the whole Bruce Lee philosophy of, I don't hit, it hits. So you drill things to such an intensity that you respond automatically. So the most difficult thing about the showdown test was probably the fact that we had to sit in Seiza before we were required to jump up and rush out and get to our positions in Kamae, ready to be tested. That was probably the most worrying thing, because I knew the techniques inside out. I knew I could make a good job of it. But the difficulty is trying to get to your feet on legs you can't feel and make a good job of anything. So that was a real fear of all of us, I think. And we were allowed to quite literally crawl out of the dojo just before we were required to get up and test. to shake our legs out, but then we had to come back and sit in seiza and then jump up and get to positions. So it wasn't a particularly tough test. I think my showdown test in the UK was probably tougher. But then I didn't train as hard for that as I did for my showdown test in Japan.
Yes. The teaching structure of the course was with basically all the main senseis would take the class on a quite casual rotation, if I understand correctly. There wasn't there wasn't any specific plan. You actually wouldn't know who was going to come out of the door and give the actual class. In between the senseis and yourselves, guys, you had two figures, you know, your supervisors, shall we call them like that? Can you explain a little bit about what the Sewonin were like with you?
Wow, the Sewonin. So Sewonin, Sewa means to care and Nin means person. So technically, these were people there to take care of us. The reality is they weren't really there to take care of us. They were there to enforce dojo ritual and routine, to make sure that we didn't step out of line. So I had a mixed relationship with the Sewonin. We had two very different guys, one guy from Canada, one guy from the UK. They were there to do a job. And at the time, you know, I couldn't stand these guys half the time at the time because they were pushing us. They were screaming at us, shouting at us. Anything we did was never good enough.
It was a good bit of abuse, yeah?
Yeah, there was. And you know, we live in a very different world now. And I was talking to somebody else about this. You know, would this kind of abuse and shouting and screaming, would it be allowed now? And probably it wouldn't. It probably wouldn't, because we've evolved to remove that kind of behavior from, or try to remove that kind of behavior from society. So I had a very mixed relationship with the Sewonin. I have to say, and this comes across, I think, in the book, that they had a job to do. They were learning how to be Sewonin, just as I was learning how to be Senshisei. And the Sewonin were Senshisei from prior year. Without the Sewonin and without how they treated us, I would not have had the experience that I had. And the experience that I had in Japan was made all the better for both of the Sewonin pushing me beyond my limit and then pushing me further. So without the Sewonin, there would not have been the level of hardship. And sometimes I think you have to go right to the depths of yourself in terms of hardship to really grow and learn. You have to push yourself so far out of your comfort zone. That's when you really, really grow. So, you know, I wrote the book. Both of the Sewonin, I've sent them a copy. I sent them a signed copy. I've not heard back from either, having hopefully read it by now. But my intention in writing the book was to portray an honest view as to how I felt about them at the time, but then also portray an honest view as to how grateful I am to them for what they did, even if I didn't really understand that what they were doing at the time would benefit me in the long run.
You spent 11 months, a very close contact with a few other guys, and some friendship, real friendship emerged. And I suppose there's been times where you clashed, but there's been times also where you had a very good time together. Can you tell us a little bit about the people that were with you? There was a lady as well. It's important to point out. It's not this course is not only a guy thing.
No, not at all. I mean, there were 12 guys, including myself, and one lady, Victoria, from Canada. So we formed a really, really close bond as a group. And what was quite interesting about that group, we're in a very different cultural experience in Japan. And we all brought very different cultural experiences from how we've been brought up, what it's like to live in our countries. And we clashed, you know, sometimes. Naturally, in a group like that, you become closer friends with people more similar to you. and you naturally form groups within groups. But what was very, very noticeable, if anybody ever messed with the Senshusei on the mats, which happens sometimes when the general students train with us, we would unite as one unit, and we would make sure that there was payback. So we were very, very, although we argued and we bickered, and you know, it's like a marriage, maybe, you know, you argue and you bicker, but
Yes.
if anyone challenges that unit, you stick together. And as I put at the start of the book, you know, we were 12 brothers and one sister in arms, and that the song by Dire Straits, Brothers in Arms, was kind of an anthem as to how we felt about one another and what we would do for one another. So I'm in contact with most people still. I had a very, very close 2 or 3 people, you know, Ronan from Israel, and Matt, who came from the UK to join me. Very close bond with both of those guys, still in regular contact with them. In fact, in more or less, you know, every few days contact with Ronan. And we never would have met, you know, very different background to me. But you attract people, and you get close to people that you have a commonality with, but within the bigger group of the Senshusei, we were a tight unit, most definitely.
Yes. I want to ask you something that you can answer or you can avoid if you prefer.
No, I'll answer. There we go. I shouldn't have said that, should I?
Yeah. Does Yoshinkan Aikido really work?
Wow.
Or does it matter? Or does it matter if it works or not?
Okay, big question, and I do go into this, and I have a very, very specific view on this, and I believe, before I give you the answer, I believe I in some way am qualified to answer this, having trained in other martial arts, because the kind of bigger question is, does Aikido work? And then within that, does Yoshinkan Aikido work? So my answer to the question is, it depends on the practitioner. So I have been on the mats and seen people do things to other people with Aikido that there is no faking it. You know, I have felt techniques applied on me that, even from somebody much, much smaller than me, much lighter than me, apply techniques that the power is incredible. And I couldn't withstand that, you know, that pain. Chino Sensei, for example, who I really respected on the course, spent a lot of time teaching us. He's maybe not the most popular sensei in Yoshinkan circles, but I can only judge on what I found. To feel his technique and his power, incredible. Depends on the practitioner, and it depends on what people come to learn Aikido for. So I believe Aikido is a very, very different martial art to other martial arts. If you go and do Muay Thai, or if you go and do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, both of which I was training at the same time in Japan, you know, there is an expectation that you're going to do some sparring, it's going to be free sparring, and you're going to test out your skills. Now, in Aikido, there isn't really a comparison. There is Jiawaza, but Jiawaza is not really free practice. It's not really testing out your skills. So you can study Aikido without ever really testing the effectiveness of Aikido, because there isn't the sparring or the kind of competition element that allows you to test your ability in the art. Now, there's nothing wrong with that necessarily, and it means, I think, that Aikido attracts people that would never want to fight. It attracts people who enjoy the beauty of the art, the physical movement of the art. They may want to do it to keep fit. They may want to do it for social reasons, and they may never want to test themselves in a physical confrontation. And that's absolutely fine. Then there are others like myself who wanted to explore Aikido to test its effectiveness. And with that mindset, with that martial mindset, which why it comes back to the practitioner, if you have a martial mindset with Aikido, Aikido does work. It does work. Is it everything? Can you rely on Aikido in any situation? Probably not. Can you rely on any martial art, one martial art in any situation? Probably not. I've studied Muay Thai for 25 years. If somebody takes me to the ground, I'm going to need something different. So that's a very long-winded answer to a very short question. And the answer is both yes and no. My issue, and I think this is other people's issue with Aikido, is that sometimes you can watch a demonstration and you watch the student, the uke, fly around as if by magic. For me, I don't like to see that. I like to see an effective technique and a realistic response. But there is more of the art side to Aikido, and that's because it is not purely studied for its martial abilities.
Okay, very good answer. Diplomatic, but also true.
But
also
honest.
true. Yes.
You know, I've stood across the mats from people. I've stood on the mats with people that if they used Aikido on me, it wouldn't work. But I've stood across from people, if they used Aikido on me, it does work. I do think it's a form of self-defense. You know, you need other things. You need to learn how to strike. Aikido doesn't really teach you to strike. Although Kancho Gozo Shioda has reportedly said atemi is 70% of a fight, you know, atemi striking, you don't really strike very much. And if you go to the ground, you're kind of in trouble. And there's something in the book, and I won't say too much about it because people need to read it and get the whole story before they get there. There can sometimes be an arrogance or an ego, I think, in Aikido, that Aikido is the answer to all problems and all confrontational situations. And there is a situation in the book where I questioned one of the instructors and said, what happens if a senior Aikido practitioner gets put on the ground in a fight? What's going to happen? If they get put on the ground in a fight, are they going to be able to use their Aikido to survive? And the response I got was, well, the principles of Aikido would help them to find a way. And for me, that was nonsense. You know, if you're going to fight on the ground, you've got to practice on the ground. If you're going to fight on your feet, you've got to practice on your feet. And principles in a real life situation will get you some of the way, but I can never say this word, experiential learning.
Of course,
is what you need.
If principles were sufficient, there'd be no training.
Exactly. Read a book and go out into a street situation. And there was a situation that one of the black belts who taught us, one of the instructors, fair play to the guy, a lot of respect for this guy. He came to a Brazilian jiu-jitsu class with me in Tokyo after the course was over, and he rolled with me. So we fought together on the ground, and the guy had no answer because he'd never
seen it before.
Yeah,
never seen it before.
He'd never trained on the ground, but his ego was, he didn't have such an ego that said, hey, Aikido will deal with anything. He was prepared to put himself in a different situation and understood that it's horses for courses.
Don't you think that sometimes, I'm not saying everyone, but there's a lot of religion in Aikido. Aikido is becoming a religion. People trust and believe in things that they haven't actually experimented themselves, and they overestimate a touch what they can do or what they cannot do.
Yes,
that's a war, I think. What do you see for Aikido in the future? Is there a future for Aikido?
I think there is a future for Aikido, but I think the future for Aikido practitioners have to be very honest with themselves, and Aikido teachers have to be very honest with themselves in terms of what they're teaching. You know, are they teaching an art that looks beautiful, feels great to, well, apart from Seiza, feels good to practice, or are they teaching people to defend themselves and to face confrontation? For me, the beauty of Aikido is what I got from Aikido after I finished training Aikido. And that's an understanding of its principle. And there's a quote at the back of the book. I include this in the last word from Kansho Gozo Shioda that he must have said years and years ago, but is very, very relevant for nowadays. And it's about this thing, harmony. People talk about Aikido and harmony, you know, Aikido, the way of harmony. And people get confused as to what that harmony actually means. Now, Aikido can be very, very brutal in a situation. But the principle of Aikido and the relationship between shite and uke, and how, as a martial art, Aikido differentiates itself, because it's not about crashing directly with somebody else. It's about absorbing somebody's energy and redirecting that energy somewhere else. And that's a very, very beautiful thing. It's a very hard thing to learn. And that is a principle for life, that we all face confrontation, we all face challenge. Instead of going head to head, which just exasperates the problem, far better, as I describe in the book, to step off the track and let the negativity fly past. And if we all did a bit more of that, we'd have a lot better world. So Aikido for me is much more than a series of movements. It's much more than a series of shapes. It's much more than the system that Yoshinkan developed. And I hope Aikido continues long into the future, but I think Aikido is about something much, much more than the movements.
Okay, can you tell us a little bit about your current projects? I know you've been busy in the last few days.
Yes. So the current projects, I obviously wrote the book, which is up behind me, Suck It Up or Go Home. I am converting that now into an audio book. So I've been in a recording studio, recording all of that content. I'm now proofing the edits of that. Very, very big project. It feels like I'm doing the course again. And every time you read your own book or hear your own book, you have ideas. Oh, maybe change this, maybe change that, and to have the discipline to say, no,
cannot do that.
No, stop. It's finished. That is how I wrote it. So that's a big project. Looking to get that audio book released before Christmas. Doing a lot of promotional work. What I try to do in the book is, although the book will naturally appeal to martial artists, I wanted this to be a book that helped people with mental resilience. You know, the world we live in now, people are facing some of the toughest mental challenges they've ever had. There's financial pressure, there's emotional pressure. People can't leave their houses in some instances. So the days are becoming very repetitive, very much like they were on the Senshusei course. So I wrote the book on different levels, and depending on what you're looking for from the book, hopefully you find what it is you're looking for. The martial artist will find a story about martial arts. Somebody who wants to find a story about a spiritual journey will hopefully find that. Somebody who wants to find out what it's like to live and work in Japan will find that. And somebody who wants to go on a journey of how to build mental resilience and what mental resilience really is all about, hopefully they'll find that too. So quite a few of my wife's friends have read it, and they've never done martial arts before. It's made some of them smile. It's made some of them cry, because it's a very emotional journey that I try and take people on. So I'm looking to try and get that, trying to come back to your question. I'm trying to get that message out there, because I honestly believe that if you read the book and you really get the message that I'm trying to deliver in the book, it could have a profound influence on your life and the direction of your life as you choose to live your life moving forwards.
Okay, Simon, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's been very insightful. Folks, go get it. Simon, where should they get it?
So the best place to buy the book currently is on Amazon. So if you go to amazon.co.uk, amazon.com, Amazon, wherever you are, you'll find the book on Kindle and paperback. Hardback is coming, audiobook is coming, but have to wait a little bit longer for that one.
Great stuff. Okay, thanks a million, Simon, and hopefully we'll meet again for your next book. Yes?
Yes, thank you. Us, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, bye, bye.